I'm Anna Thorvaldsdottir, composer, and we are here in my studio in Surrey, England.
And I'm Anne Lanzilotti, and I've commissioned Anna to write a new piece for me for viola and electronics. I'm really excited to be here with her. So I wanted to start off with just talking about, if you could talk a little bit about what is your background with string instruments in general? Because you originally started on the cello, didn't you?
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, well, as a kid, I played various instruments, and all from piano and flutes and trumpet, and then I really wanted to play a string instrument. I love the cello, so when I was actually a teenager, around 13, I started to play the cello, and it was really a fundamental love, you know, to play that instrument. I was very serious about it, so I was playing a lot and rehearsing a lot, and so strings have always had a very big kind of. It's been a big part of myself as a composer, writing for strings. So it's been really amazing to work on this solo piece for viola with electronics. And I could actually just dive into and talk about the electronics a little bit, sure. Because the electronics are also worked from material played on the viola. So it's really from the same source. And I really wanted the electronics to be kind of an organic part of the piece rather than a completely different sound world. So it really combines with the live performance.
Is there anything in the electronics that's synthesized sound or manipulated sound, or are all of the sounds acoustic?
So all of the sounds are acoustic, but I manipulate them a little bit, and of course can repeat them, but they are all organic and come from the viola and are not manipulated in the sense that they become alien. So, but the way that I perhaps put them together, sometimes it's a bit ambiguous what's happening, but it all comes from the viola.
Nice. Are there any things that are pitch shifted or slowed down? There's one color in there that feels there's something different about the quality of it. That's, yeah. You know.
Exactly. It's the one part of the piece where I have the tone, the pitch is slowed down, so it sounds a bit more muddy, earthy, and so that's the only kind of alternation I did to the sound. Everything else comes from the different textures of bow techniques and airy textures that actually are also present in the piece for the viola performance, but put into the electronics as well.
Were you already thinking about how you wanted to change the sounds when you gave me those original pieces to record, or was that something that you came to after you had listened to the pieces? Because you sent me these fragments to record, and then so what was your process with that?
Exactly. So exactly, I knew the sounds that I was using, and I wanted to use in the live part in the viola, and I actually wanted to have a very clear presence of those sounds before I would record material for the electronics, so that it would come from the same source of material. So it was actually, I knew the material I wanted to use, and then when I got it, I was able to use some of the parts, and maybe not all of them, but put them into the right context. It's a bit difficult to explain because it's a part of a creative process, and throughout the creative process you throw away material and you take it back in, or abandon it. So initially when I sent you these excerpts that you recorded, I had an idea about how I wanted to use them, and then that also changed a bit. So some of the material that I had in mind then got edited out, so which I think is a very healthy part of the composition process.
Was some of it just kind of hearing somebody else play them, or I know that because you played a stringed instrument and you write really beautifully for strings, which is why I really wanted to work with you. I've always really loved your music, but was some of that just kind of hearing me in particular play through some of the things, or just kind of in context as you were manipulating the sound, what felt like it was a part of the piece, or how did you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. All of the sounds that I'm using, I had a very, very good idea about how they sound. And then, you know, getting the material from you and getting to, because I had to live with that as well, to kind of, because you also gave me different versions of some of the techniques, which was amazing. And then you can just choose and go deeper. And it was like really a combination of choosing the sounds that you sent and making it work into the electronics.
Yeah, it was fun to play around with that because I was really lucky to have the space to record for free, so I could take the time to try different things.
That's amazing.
And your notation was really clear about all of the things, but kind of some of the sounds is interesting to, since you weren't in the room.
Sure.
It was fun to kind of play around with some options, or kind of give you more things that you could use if you wanted to. So. Yeah.
When you have a piece that's for a live performance and then electronics that are fixed, and you obviously have a tempo written into the live part. So when I was working with the electronics, and I usually do this when I have electronics, I want to allow for certain flexibility in the electronics so that not every single part has to align perfectly. And this is a way to kind of to make it organic, the way that the live instrument goes with the electronics. However, in some parts in this piece, the electronics are listed like very specifically where they go together with the live performance. And so my thought was to give the performer, you, a tool to know, okay, now we are here, and this is actually a process that I think needs to be learned throughout the rehearsal process, because you cannot, in the same way as if you have a piano or another instrument, you can tune each other, like you can come together at certain parts, but you in a way have to, for some parts, rely on the electronics, and for some parts the electronics have to follow you, in a sense. And I like that relationship also, to kind of work with that perspective. And this is also particularly evident in a section where we have harmonics, the natural harmonics, which becomes kind of a theme. And for part of the piece, the electronics echo that.
Right.
And the tempo of the electronics is essentially the same, but because we are in a live situation, the performance of the live performer will always become more organic because the other one is fixed. So I like that, that it's not, you don't have to synchronize with the click track in your ear, because I think it's a beautiful thing when it doesn't perfectly line up. I like that.
Yeah, it felt really nice it's been nice to run through it and be trying different things out with it and what works, and also kind of reassuring, because I feel like even though I haven't actually premiered the piece yet, that I've known the material now for almost a year from recording these other excerpts, and so it's nice that it's had time to kind of sit with me, and I feel like as I continue to get to know the electronics, that'll be a nice element of it that I like.
Yeah, great.
There are some rhythms in this piece that feel to me like they're speech rhythms or something. I was wondering if you could talk at all about how you come up with the rhythmic content, or if that's something that you use at all.
Yeah. Usually rhythmic content for me as a composer comes very intuitively, and perhaps that's why it feels like speech, but it's something that I really spend a lot of time just living with and going through in my mind to really get a sense of where there's rhythm, because there are different types of rhythm. There's rhythm that's more like a sustained rhythm where you have these tremolos, and there's rhythm where you have themes played in a rhythm, and then there is rhythm that becomes an ocean where you have these quicker motifs happening. And this is something I really work a lot with, and intuitively, I think. And it's difficult to kind of, for myself at least, to really explain. Often, of course, I use systems and I create systems that I then use, but then again, if I'm walking through these systems in my head and with the music and experiencing them, and if I don't like the way they sound, then I abandon them and create a new system. So yeah, it's a combination of intuitive and systematic approach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also fits into, sometimes you talked about in some of your larger works how you'll kind of think about things in terms of landscapes and zooming in and zooming out. And I think the way that a pattern might seem from far away or might seem from really, really microscopically zoomed in is not necessarily what the reality of it is in a different perspective. And so that's something else I think is really nice about that kind of process, just that you're playing around with this idea of their related structures, so that it does feel very organic. That's what I was thinking, maybe it was speech or something, but that it feels very logical, and even if those things change slightly as you're working on the piece, that it feels as though they're related in these layers, and that even if it ended up getting changed in this layer, that it was kind of a memory of what the structure was when you looked at it, you know, a month ago, and then you're trying to remember what this thing looked like, and maybe it's been changed slightly, and it's not actually what it looks like, but it's got a relation based on your memory of it.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, thank you. It's and absolutely, some perspective is something that I really like working with in my music, and it relates to both kind of this kind of perspective and this. So if I explain that a little bit, to me the perspective can be taking harmony and placing it in a horizontal way or in a vertical way, and this also relates a lot to the level of bow pressure and how you kind of take things in and out and zoom in and out of focus in various ways. And this is also organically, I think, relates to rhythm in a sense, at least for some parts of the music.
Were there any of the things that you played through? I mean, viola and cello share strings, and even though they're slightly different, seeing you describe the extended techniques, and you're still kind of thinking about the physicality sometimes when you show me. So were there any things that you played through, or were you just kind of thinking about it? Because all of the things feel really comfortable to play. I mean, it feels to me like it's clear that I know you're a string player, but it's obvious that you know the instrument really well. So what is that like as part of your process? Yeah, exactly.
So when I'm writing music, I never use any instrument or anything. I use paper and pencil, but I, of course, as you say, I do play the cello, not as much anymore like I used to, but it's a very big part of my musical identity. And yes, I do know the instruments very well, so it's very important to me that the music is kind of, that it's not written in a way that's impossible. You know, I want it to sometimes sound impossible, and I want it to not be easy to play, but it's important to me that it's intuitive and that you respect the performer who's playing. And so I didn't, for this, writing this piece, I didn't play out through any of the textures, but also because I have played them many times before myself on the cello, and it's also very, for myself, it feels free not to be at the instrument when I'm writing music. For other people, many other people, it's more free to be at the instrument while they're composing. So it's just a different, what works for each and everyone.
You've also said in the past that sometimes you'll draw a lot at the beginning of the very beginning of your process. You'll kind of draw out structures or kind kind of ideas for the piece. Did you do that at all for this piece?
I did, definitely, yeah. I usually, because at the initial stage, I always spend a lot of time getting to know what it is that the piece wants and where the piece wants to go and what the music will be. And I also did that with this piece. And at that stage, I have to do some sort of a map so that I can remember where it is that the music wants to live, because it's different each time. I mean, the sketches may be primarily words, or the sketches may be very kind of pictures of something, and I have some things that indicate this and that I can then listen to, but it doesn't mean anything to anyone else. It's just looking at some scribbles. But I did that, yes, but it wasn't because it's a solo instrument. It's difficult. It's a different picture. Whereas if you have like an orchestra or a big ensemble, you have all these different voices to sketch out. So it's different each time.
When I wanted to ask you to write this piece, I wanted to leave it open to you, because the idea of this set of commissions was to reflect these, the centennial, to kind of celebrate the centennial of these pieces that were all for viola and piano, but I kind of wanted to leave it open because I love the way that you use electronics, and I thought that this could be a really interesting kind of 21st century way to reflect this idea of the chamber music, and you're saying different kind of chamber music with electronics. And so aside from the obvious of that it's a solo instrument, what were some other things that influenced your choice for the title of the piece?
So actually, because the commission was from this background it's a really amazing project, by the way, because it's a wonderful way to celebrate the past and hopefully the future. And so I wanted to have electronics because it's a different type of accompaniment, if you will. And I don't very often work with electronics, but when I do, I try to make it really needs to mean something for myself. And when I was working on this piece, I was thinking a lot about the loneliness of the solo voice of the viola in some sort of discussion with the electronics. And the title came actually from this isolation and this fragility, because it is very fragile, and a lot of the nuances and things in the piece are very fragile, and I wanted the title to have reference to that in a sense. So even though there are big sounds in there, they are all very tactile, and the title felt right for this.
What else are you working on writing right now?
So I recently finished a really long orchestra piece that's 45 minutes of music. I wrote it for the Gothenburg Symphony, co-commissioned by the Iceland Symphony Orchestra, and that will be premiered May 2019. And then I also am finishing writing a string quartet for Spectral Quartet. So these are the most recent ones, and then just moving on to the next. I really like having a couple of pieces that I'm working on at the same time, and I like it when they're different, so that I can be fresh in one piece when I'm tired in the other one. So it's something that's worked well for me.
Do you try to spread out the commissions so that the deadlines are alternating, or do you ever take things with close deadlines, but that you just kind of alternate how you pace writing the piece? Or
yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely sometimes have close deadlines, but the thing is that the way I work is that I always have to be early. I know a lot of composers who work very well when they're under pressure, but my pressure is usually much earlier than the deadline. So when I have a deadline, I, for myself, need to be finished at least 2 months earlier so that I can really live with a piece before I hand it in. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm not afraid of like aligning deadlines close to one another. So yeah, but I'm very organized in the way that I schedule this. So because I want to make sure that I absolutely have time and space and energy to work a lot on each piece.
Yeah. Well, I remember you saying that it's sometimes harder for you to work while you're on the road because you do a lot of traveling to be at premieres, which is amazing. Yeah. I think it's really powerful for people to also see you when they get to hear your piece and hear your voice is so strong. And so to get to see you there is powerful. And so I remember you saying before that it was harder for you to work on the road. So do you mostly write in the studio?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the thing is that it's actually very difficult for me to work on the road. So I always make sure to schedule a few weeks at a time that I can be in my studio working on music. And I think maybe one of the primary reasons it's difficult for me to work on the road is that, of course, I don't have enough space, both with regards to time and also my physical space, and I need all of my papers and all of my things that I can surround myself with when I'm working. But sometimes when I'm editing at the final stages, I can do that on the road. But that's,
when it's more kind of copy work and feeling more separated from the material.
Yeah, and you're doing last edits. Yeah, because that happens in the computer also. Yeah.
Do you teach at all in London, or do you?
So I've not taken any positions. I've been wanting to focus on composition, but I do residencies quite a lot. I try to do at least 2 a year somewhere. So I've been doing residencies in Denmark and here in the UK and in Germany and in the US, and it's really nice to go and teach a little bit, give have presentations and take individual students in composition, and I really enjoy doing that. But also it's because if I would have a position, I know I wouldn't be able to write as much music because I would be focusing so much on teaching. So I'd rather do residencies.
Well, and also it's really nice that you get to spend a lot of time at your residency with Iceland Symphony.
Sure.
To really know the musicians, and I think that also comes out, not just that you play an orchestral instrument or these various orchestral instruments so well, but that you've also spent so much time in that community that it seems like when they play your music, they really kind of have adopted you and your music, and so they really play it with a lot of care. Which is not always true with new music, with orchestras. Sure.
I mean, it's wonderful. It's of course always different when people have played your music before and then they know the way you write and they can immediately go into the textures and sounds. And the Iceland Symphony Orchestra has played a lot of my music, so it's wonderful to see them. For example, we had a reading of my new orchestra piece in Iceland the other day, and just immediately all the textures came to life. Whereas with an orchestra, for example, that might never have played my music, it takes a bit of time to just go into the textures. And that's normal and natural. And it's a beautiful balance, and it's beautiful to work with orchestras. And I have the deepest passion for writing for larger ensembles and orchestras. So it's always a pleasure to work with different orchestras.
Your final project for your doctorate was A Reality. Was that the first really big orchestral piece that you had written? I know you had written big chamber works before, but...
No, actually, I had written already 3 or 4 orchestra pieces before I wrote A Reality. In fact, I wrote my first orchestra piece before I started to study composition.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's just been such a deep passion of mine for such a long time to work with larger ensembles and these larger forces that when I was around 20 I hadn't started to study composition, but I was then starting to notate music for the first time. I'd been making music before but not notating it, so almost immediately when I started to notate I realized, wow, because I'd of course been attending orchestra concerts and I just knew that I loved this. So yes, I wrote my first orchestra piece before I started studying, and then I started my bachelor studies and I immediately wrote the next one and then my third one, which was Dreaming. Yeah, and then I've written a few orchestra pieces.
Were those all written with a group in mind that was going to play it, or with the first one, did you just write it because you really wanted to write it? And then
yeah, many people would say that I was crazy, which is probably true, but the thing is that it was a thing of passion. I thought, like, I don't care if it ever gets played, I just really want to do this and I need to do this. Actually, at least one said to me, you must be crazy, it will never be performed and you're wasting your time. And that kind of like, no, you know what, I have this passion and I hope that I will do more of this, and maybe one day some orchestra will ask me to write an orchestra piece, and then I would have wanted to do it before so that I know somewhat what I'm doing. But in fact, this first orchestra piece I wrote, a couple of years later, someone from the orchestra heard about this person who had written an orchestra piece before she started studying composition, and I was encouraged to show them the music, and they ended up programming it actually a couple of years later, which was of course a really wonderful experience, and and I can't stop, and I don't want to stop.
That's wonderful. Well, I think that sometimes people can get discouraged by feeling like there's no way of kind of getting it done, and the type of focus that this kind of quiet focus. It's just, no, I'm going to do this. And, somehow it's going to happen. I think it's so important for what we do, or in
absolutely,
music.
Absolutely, and it was just purely passion, and purely something that I really needed to do and I really wanted to do. And I had the ability. I mean, I was working 2 jobs at the time, and studying the cello, but it was just a really fundamental thing for me.